Strange Shadows, a Carcash and Smith podcast.
I find it peculiarly difficult to express the exact nature of the sentiment which Tomeron had always evoked in me. However, I am sure that the feeling never partook at any time of what is ordinarily known as friendship. It was a compound of unusual aesthetic and intellectual elements, and was somehow closely allied in my thoughts with the same fascination that has drawn me ever since childhood towards all things that are remote in space and time, or which have about them the irresolvable twilight of antiquity.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Series 1, Episode 11 of Strange Shadows. The voice you just heard was Shelley Cruz of Graveheart Designs, reading the opening paragraph of the first story we're going to cover today. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yeah, we've got two stories this week, so they're both kind of short, aren't they?
Yeah, the first one's very short. I think I read somewhere when it was published in Weird Tales, this barely covered 2 pages or just 2 to 3 pages, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And it's interesting. One of the things that I was going to say in the thing, but I may as well say it now, is that he subbed it to a short-lived Weird Tales competitor, but it was rejected because of its brevity.
Right.
He said he really liked it, but it's too short.
Yeah.
So
I think this is maybe the shortest story so far. I mean, I know we had the sort of prose poem at the start, Sedastor, but this is an actual story, and it is very, very short.
it is, but saying that, it packs in a ton of atmosphere in like 2 or 3 pages.
Yes.
It oozes atmosphere. I think it's a really good sort of mood piece.
Absolutely.
I guess if it was music, you'd call it a chamber piece, wouldn't you?
Nice.
Yeah.
Very baroque, as is befitting Mr. Smith.
Indeed.
And that's the Epiphany of Death. And after that, we'll be covering the murder in the 4th dimension, interdimensional. Well, it's not really a murder mystery, is it? Because we know what's going on, but it leaves a mystery behind.
I'd never read it before. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, me too. Same
different
here.
As well, like really different to most of Smith's other work, except for that sort of humour and that hopelessness.
Okay, and we've also got we've been getting some communications coming in through various channels. So we'll be reading some of those out at the end as well. Thanks very much. We do appreciate all your comments, of course.
Indeed. Yeah.
And you can always comment on our YouTube, our Patreon, Facebook, or you can always drop us a line at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. So, the Epiphany of Death.
Yeah, it was inspired by Clark reading HPL's Statement of Randolph Carter. That's what inspired this piece. And he wrote it in 3 hours on January the 25th in 1930, that's pretty good going, really. Even though it is a short piece, that's not bad going to get it done and dusted. And he had it ready and sent off to Lovecraft on the 27th, dedicated to the man himself, which is obvious to see why.
Yeah.
It was interesting in a letter shortly after he'd sent it to Lovecraft. He sent a letter to August Derleth saying that he'd sent it and blah, 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 blah. And he just read The Outsider by Lovecraft and actually commented that it reminded him of that story, but he'd never read it. He'd never actually read The Outsider at that point.
We see this quite a lot, don't we? Between all the Lovecraft circle and various other people, it's almost like a friend of mine always puts it as like they're riding the same wave.
Yes.
You know, we sometimes think, oh, that must have influenced that, but then you find out that hadn't been written till after, and so on and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it happens like with music a lot as well, doesn't it? You'll get 2 bands around the same time release a song that sounds pretty much the same, and you're like, well, who recorded it first? Well, they kind of did it at the same time.
Blockbuster and Genie, there's an example. Sweet and Bowie.
That's a great example.
Pretty much the same riff.
It is, yes, yeah. So Smith subbed it to Strange Tales of Mystery and Terror in 31, and that's why I said it got rejected due to its brevity. He then subbed it to Farnsworth Wright, who rejected it.
Surprise.
It was finally published in 1934 in the July issue of a fanzine called The Fantasy Fan. And then it sort of languished again. Was later published as Who Are the Living? It was renamed.
That's a nice title.
Yeah, it was republished as Who Are the Living in the September 42 issue of Weird Tales, when it was under the stewardship of Dorothy McIlwraith, which is a great name.
McIlwraith.
McIlwraith, yeah, I think that's how you say it. Yeah,
could be.
That's a great name, isn't
it? Like someone's going to shout out an Lord of the Rings, isn't it? McIlwraith. It's like a dwarvish battle cry.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, the stewardship had changed a couple of times since he'd subbed it at that point. So,
and was this a kind of Weird Tales getting in anything by Smith at that point, because it proved very popular and stuff they rejected before? They think, well, we'll put it in now, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's around the same sort of time that we mentioned last time that Derleth had said that people keep asking him for Smith stuff, but he wasn't sending anything because he wasn't really writing at that point. He was concentrating on his sculpture and things like that, wasn't he, at that point?
And to be honest, I don't think I'd read this one before either. I think either of these stories. I mean, although this was a Weird Tales story, I don't think it's in any of the Panther paperbacks.
No, I think it was released in the Abominations of Yondo.
Right.
I could be wrong on that.
Right.
No, I'm not. It was. Yes.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, right. I've just written down AY, which is the abbreviation in the book we're using for Abominations of Yondo.
And shall we choose our favourite words? It's a short story, but as always, it's bursting with voluptuous vocabulary.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good one. Yeah, I had a couple out of that one. The first one was Lacunae, which is an unfilled gap or space. It also refers to a cavity or depression in bones.
That's nice, isn't it? And you must have heard of the band, right? Lacunae Coil.
Lacunae Coil, yeah.
Were they Italian or something?
Yeah, an Italian gothic metal band in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. Saw them a couple of times, actually. Pretty good.
Oh, right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I had that one down. That's a nice one. What else? Well, I think we're going to have the same ones again.
Probably. Well, I've got adit.
Oh, right. No, I didn't have that.
It's an adit, which is a horizontal path leading into a mine. Yeah, it's sort of the entryway to a mine or subterranean chamber.
Oh, I missed that one. Yeah.
What do you get?
I had recondite, which I like. It's difficult or obscure. Demonian, which is simply relating to a demon.
Nice.
And then my favourite one, which I had to look up, was adipocere.
Oh, adipocere, yeah. Oh, I know that one.
The grey waxy substance you get in decomposition.
Yeah, I know that one from reading True Crime. I also know it from Doctor Who, because in the David Tennant era, you had that episode where people, this slimming company were making monsters out of people's fat, and they were called the adipose.
Oh, nice.
I've actually got a squidgy one.
Oh.
These cute little fat monsters, they were great. They were the least threatening thing ever.
Oh, of course, adipose. Yeah, I've heard that expression before, like liposuction and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
the adipose layer, I think, isn't it, or something?
Well, the forensics term adipose slippage is when bodies are left in water and the skin slips off because the fats
off, isn't it?
It's because the fats, the adipose has deteriorated.
There you go, folks. Not only do you get amazing stories here, not only do you get great new words to learn, you get a little bit of forensic science as well. I like to think we cater to it.
Nice.
Okay, so it's as we say, such a short story. There's not a lot on plot, but there is a lot of atmosphere. And we're introduced to two characters, Tomeron and Theolus, who live in Ptolemyades. Now, as far as I can find out, these names are maybe Greek in origin. I can't find any famous people that have either the name Tomeron or Theolus.
They sound Greek.
Yeah. Well, this fits in because Ptolemyades, which again I think is Smith's invention, most likely relates to the Ptolemaic kingdom.
Yeah.
Which that's when Greece took over Egypt, basically. 305 BC, Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander the Great's leading generals, basically strode into Egypt and said, I'm the pharaoh now, and established his dynasty. And that lasted until 32 BC with the death of Cleopatra. of infamy. They've all got it infamy.
Yes.
And of course, under Ptolemy, Alexandria was built as the capital. And of course, as we know, Alexandria was the great cultural center of its day.
Yep. The library and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of fits in with the story, doesn't it? This idea of scholars and libraries, and also perhaps tombs and crypts and ancient knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, it's we've got this dedication to Lovecraft, and it's quite easy to see Tomeron as Lovecraft, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
One thing that interests me, because we get his voice mentioned on the second page, he often discoursed to me in that deep, guttural and monotonous voice of his that had the reverberation of unsounded caverns in its tones and cadences. Would Smith have ever heard Lovecraft's voice? That's something to consider.
I don't know. Yeah, that is interesting. At that point, probably not. No,
because telephones were a thing then, but they weren't a common thing.
I can't imagine he had one in his cabin in Auburn.
No,
so.
And somehow I can't imagine that Lovecraft would have liked using one, but I'd have to check on
that. Yeah, no, I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's what his friend told him after she'd been scared shitless by him in the graveyard.
Oh, of course, yes, Miss Sully. Yeah, so she would have, obviously she met Lovecraft in person and had that story. Or perhaps it's how Smith imagined Lovecraft would speak.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, if you look at him, you would imagine a sort of Christopher Lee-esque. Yes. Almost kind of voice, because he's that kind of big sort of loping sort of chap, wasn't he?
Yeah. And it's when you think of like Crowley, isn't it? You look at Crowley and you think he looks like a big guy.
Oh yeah,
and then you hear those.
Then you hear that voice.
And it's,
That
sort Equinox
nasal, isn't it?
It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes, all that kind of. Iopan, yeah. It's very strange when I think you do get sort of a misconception sometimes. You look at somebody and you expect them to sound one way and they don't.
Yeah,
but it's interesting because this is one of the stories I want to include in a. We're going to do a future episode of the Innsmouth Book Club podcast on the deaths of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes.
Yeah, because like over the years, like even up to sort of present day, his parts of the circle and people who were inspired by him have liked to have their own version of Lovecraft in their stories and then kill him off.
It seems to happen to him a lot more than any other author I can
exactly.
think of.
Yeah, well, I think it started with Robert Bloch, didn't it?
Started with Bloch.
I think it did. And then Belknap Long did it.
Yeah. And I can think of stories where Howard, Smith and Lovecraft are characters that were written obviously a lot later.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think that they were killed off in those. There was one, they were almost like a sort of detective agency,
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting.
Interestingly, there was actually an episode of the TV series Supernatural.
Oh, right.
Which had Lovecraft in it.
Oh, was
and it's obviously it was set later, but it was basically that Lovecraft had opened the door to these Leviathan things, and that was how he died. It wasn't he didn't die from stomach cancer. It was these Leviathan things that got him, sort of thing. So it's still happening, and even in TV,
it's still happening now. Yes, well, it's kind of. I know, like Cthulhu is an iconic figure, but Lovecraft, I feel, is equally as iconic.
I think so.
In the same way, when you see Poe, you know that is, even people who've never read Poe will recognise him. So we get some lovely language in this. These two are friends, but Theolus can't really remember how he first became acquainted with Tomeron, how they became friends, but he does recall the studies to which Tomeron had devoted himself. And even though we're in historic Egypt, presumably Ptolemaic Egypt, we get this nice reference to the lost demonian volumes from Hyperborea and Mu and Atlantis, with which his library shelves were heaped to the ceiling. So he's tying it very much in with his own mythos here, his own prehistory, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, that sort of echoes our thoughts of Lovecraft, because you would imagine him, especially with his comments about private libraries and all that kind of thing, you expect him to be surrounded by dusty old tomes and
weird charts and strange maps, and over which he pored by perpetual candlelight, which is something we know about Lovecraft, right? When he couldn't afford his bills, it was reading and writing by candlelight or lamplight. And I really like this little bit as well. He maintained that life and death were not the fixed conditions that people commonly believe them to be, that the two realms were often intermingled in ways not readily discerned and had penumbral borderlands, that the dead were not always the dead, nor the living the living. That's nice, isn't it? That's nice.
Great, isn't it? Yeah.
And this is sort of interesting as well. My feeling for Tomeron was never anything that could be classified as friendship. You get these relationships quite often in these stories. You obviously get friendships, but you seem to get these associations between scholars or delvers into the mystic arts or something. It's more like almost a sort of partnership or an association.
Yeah, you get that a lot with Lovecraft's miskatonic stuff. It's never I went to see an old friend or I popped out to have down the speakeasy with a good old chap new from college. It was always a visiting professor or somebody they knew through correspondence.
Yeah.
You know.
And I wonder if this was a sort of hangover from the Edwardian, because I'm thinking the M.R. James type characters.
The antiquarians and all that.
Yeah, it's rarely I went to stay at my brother's house and this happened, is it? It's quite often I was researching this or they're off on their lone travels doing their research or something.
Yeah. I was in the gentleman's club talking to a professor from a rival institution. Yeah.
And we do get this description of his friend, inverted commas. Whilst his pallor was too cadaverous, too suggestive of fungi that have grown in the dark or of leprous bones by moonlight, and the stoop of his shoulders conveyed to my brain the idea that they bore a burden of centuries through which no man could conceivably have lived. So this guy, I don't know, straight away that puts me in mind of a kind of lurch or something like that. This full stooped figure with a cadaverous look about him.
Yeah.
And of course, we're being primed all the way through. This is the Lovecraft thing again. The ending is never really a surprise, is it? Because we get it almost from the opening line that this guy might be dead.
Yeah.
So it's not a shock when we find out, but it's the way we get there that is the strength of the story. So these two are associates for some time. But then Tomeron actually says, Theolus, the time is coming when you must know the truth. And I am compelled to ask an odd favour of you, which I hope you will grant me in consideration of our long fellowship. The favour is that you accompany me this very night to those vaults of my family which lie in the Catacombs of Ptolemyades. So this is where we get the Randolph Carter thing, right, of going down into the crypt. For those who don't know that story, just very briefly, it recounts the tale of Randolph Carter and his friend Warren.
Yeah.
And Warren goes down to investigate the crypts, and they've like a sort of portable telephone thing, don't they?
Yes. It's like the ones they used in the trenches in the First World War.
That's it. Yeah. Almost like spooling out the wire as he goes down.
Yeah.
And when Warren gets down there, he's relaying all this back through the apparatus. Oh my God, there's really strange and terrible things down here. And spoiler alert, it kind of all goes quiet for a bit. And Carter saying, Warren, Warren. And then you get an unearthly voice saying, Warren is dead, you fool, which is a nice one. It's a great story.
I love that. It's a great story.
If you want to see a great version of that as well, we'll put the link in. Greg Johnson and Chris Lackey have done a really great short comic version, which on YouTube, we'll put the link up to that.
Yeah, that's precisely what I was just going to say. What are you wearing? Now, I love our narrator's reply here. It's that thing we see a lot in Smith. You get this understatement from his characters in the response to something sort of outlandish request. You get this lovely understatement. So, though much surprised by the request, are not altogether pleased. We're really, I'm not going down a bloody tube.
Is it interesting? They always have it's almost like English drawing room sensibilities, don't they? A lot of these characters. Yeah. It's I say, old chap, would you mind accompanying me down into the family vaults? Well, I suppose I can, Buffy. Yes, I suppose. I'm not really pleased about it, but yeah, they're very polite, aren't they? Very much.
Again, even though this is set in where it is, I still get the image of the characters in tweed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thought at first that this was it could be a modern day story.
I thought it was set in around the same sort of time as around, Statement of Randolph Carter. I thought it was 20s.
Yeah. So we're off from, we're leaving the mansion because, again, they always live in mansions.
Mm-hmm.
And they seek the ancient catacombs of Ptolemyades, which lie beyond the walls and have long been disused, for there is now a fine necropolis in the very heart of the city. So this is old catacombs we're going to. It's not the new modern cemetery they got in the heart of town. And this is Smith going down into the crypts again.
Yep.
It's a common theme.
It is, yeah.
So this bit reminded me a little bit of Satamprazeros, where we're going out of the town to the old place again, and that sense of the old place that's been abandoned and no longer used.
Yes.
And it's probably a little bit shunned because it might be haunted, etc., etc.
Yeah. It's a common theme through a lot of Smith stuff, isn't it? That feeling of leaving civilization behind and going into the sort of the dark, barbarous ages.
Yeah. And I really like this little passage here. The moon had gone down beyond the desert that encroaches towards the catacombs, and we were forced to light our torches long before we came to the subterranean adits. There's that word.
Yeah.
For the rays of Mars and Jupiter in a sodden and funereal sky were not enough to illumine the perilous path we followed among mounds and fallen obelisks and broken graves. The idea that you're guided by the rays of Mars and Jupiter, which they're quite bright, but they hardly give off a lot of light. It's not like the moon, is it?
No. It's again, it's so vivid, isn't it? I love this little passage here. At length, we discovered the dark, weed-choked entrance of the charnels. Lovely language, isn't it? It's just great.
And entering, we found ourselves in a crumbling passage where the bones of dilapidated skeletons were scattered amid the rubble that had fallen from the sides and roof. A choking stench of stagnant air and of age-old corruption made me pause for a moment, but Tomeron scarcely appeared to perceive it. So this guy seems to know where he's going.
Yeah.
This place holds no mystery or fear or terror for him. I guess you could argue if this is his family vault, he's likely been here before when his family were interred.
Yeah.
But it seems like, given the state of it, no one's been here for a while. This isn't like a well-kept family crypt, is it?
No. It's all overgrown and weed-choked, as you mentioned. And lovely mentions here of mouldy bones and verdigris eating sarcophagi. So yeah, it's not as if it's one of these like you see these big cemeteries in cities that are all nicely tended to, and they have caretakers and all that kind of business. This is something that's just been left to rot.
Yeah, and even to the extent of we get this nice little piece about the sarcophagi were piled about the walls or strewn where desecrating thieves had left them in bygone years. So it's that old that the tomb robbers have been in and sort of plundered the place. Again, which means no one's been here for ages. The air is increasingly dank, chill, and miasmal, and mephitic shadows crouched or swayed before our torches in every niche and corner. As we went onward, the walls became more ruinous, and the bones we saw on every hand were greener with the mould of time.
Awesome. We've got two goth band names there, Mould of Time and Mephitic Shadows.
Oh, the Mephitic Shadows. Yeah. There's like a sort of goth Hank Marvin, I think.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Then again, if you want spooky surf, you want to check out a band called the Phobias.
Indeed. Yeah, there you go.
The Mephitic Shadows. That'll be when we get really famous and we do, like Sex Pistols played as the Spots, didn't they? And that kind of stuff. That'll be out.
Yeah, Sex Pistols on tour. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mephitic Shadows.
Love it.
So they eventually come to the sort of family vault. And Tomeron announces, my ancestors and my family lie here. I'm just wondering what our narrator is thinking at this time. I mean, it's got to be damp, cold, sort of choking on the stench a little bit. Yeah. And with this tall, cadaverous guide, it's almost like being guided into the underworld or something, isn't it?
Yeah, you do get that kind of, I think we mentioned this a lot in a lot of Smith stuff. It's almost like crossing the threshold, isn't it? It's like it's being guided.
And at the end of this cavern, there's a blank wall. At one side was the final vault, in which an empty sarcophagus stood open. The sarcophagus was wrought of the finest bronze and was richly carven. So this implies that the thieves haven't been down this far. We must be a fair way in. Or it makes me wonder, is there something that's guarding this sarcophagus or this tomb?
Yeah.
Satampra Xeros. I know it's in a different time frame, but Xeros didn't get this far in.
Formless spawn coming out of the sarcophagus. Oh, there's an idea.
And this is the point where Tomeron, having brought him this far, says, you've got to leave.
Yeah.
And come back in a few moments, which is you sort of think, what's he going to do? What's going on here?
Yes. Ominous, isn't it? You just stand outside the room for a minute. Why? What are you going to do?
That'd be a natural response, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah. If I go in and you've taken your clothes off, I'm out the front door.
Are you going to hear some strange chanting, or
Yeah.
what's going to go on? So, of course, he does this. He follows this request from his friend or his acquaintance. And when he comes back into the vault, empty, until he looks into the richly carven sarcophagus and saw that it was now tenanted, for a cadaver lay within, shrouded in a winding sheet of a sort that had not been used for centuries in Ptolemyades. So that idea of antiquity again, not only in the place, but in the manner of the... this presumably fresh corpse being prepared. And of course, when he peers into the face of the cadaver, he sees that it bore a fearful and strange resemblance to the face of Tomeron, though it was bloated and puffed with the adipocere of death and was purple with the shadows of decay. There's the album name.
Oh, right. Yeah. Awesome.
So this is a shock in itself. This is the first punchline, right, at the end of the story. And already you've got loads of questions. Well, we presume this is Tomeron, but if it is, how comes he suddenly looks decayed? Who wrapped him in the shroud? How did that happen? Did he wrap himself in the shroud? What happened there? Has he always been there, and what was walking around was something else? Lots of questions are raised. But then we get the final punchline as well.
Yeah.
I would have screamed aloud with the horror that came upon me, but my lips were benumbed and frozen, and I could only whisper Tomeron's name. But as I whispered it, the lips of the cadaver seemed to part, and the tip of its tongue protruded between them. So he thinks he's about to get the answer to his question. But gazing more closely, I saw that the trembling was merely the movement of worms as they twisted up and down and to and fro and sought to crowd each other from Tomeron's tongue.
Lovely. Yeah, lovely. It's a lovely image, isn't it? Yeah.
The end, and that's it. So our narrator doesn't get any answers. We don't get any answer. Presumably at that point, he would have turned and fled screaming.
Yeah, it brings a whole new meaning to worm tongue, doesn't it? You know, the Tolkien character.
Oh, nice. So again, we can see the connections with Randolph Carter, obviously, with that story. But this is now from the point of view of the person going down into the crypt rather than one waiting up at the top.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, we presume at the end there that our narrator gets out, but who's to say something else doesn't happen to him? You know, it's so many things in the best Weird Tales traditions are left unanswered here. So many questions.
I like that. I mean, I like that. Leaving, I think I've mentioned before that I'm a big fan of when you leave things ambiguous, because your mind can just go off on so many tangents thinking about, you know, what if this, what if that? Yeah. And that's the beauty of a good weird tale, isn't it? It gets your mind thinking. The sort of stuff that keeps you awake at night. What wiggly worms come in my mouth when I'm trying to sleep?
And do you think part of this as well, whether it's intentional or not, is this idea of if they're sharing ideas and stories between them, this really leaves the way open for Lovecraft to come back with the next story or the same character, or I think like Haunter of the Dark type thing, where you have this series of connected stories. I don't think they ever quite meshed and did that, really. There's little hints of it.
No.
And you can only wonder if, given time, that is something that would have developed perhaps, you know, you can almost imagine like a round robin from Howard to Smith to Wandry to Lovecraft.
Well, like the challenge from Beyond.
Yeah. That would have been really interesting.
That would have been really cool. It's interesting because, you know, when you brought up the bit about the sarcophagi being left for tomb robbers and all that being strewn all over the floor, the first thing that sprung to my mind was the Lovecraft tale In the Vault.
Oh yes,
about that hapless tomb robber and you know the cheap grave digger who'd been chopping the feet off to fit them in smaller coffins. Yeah, which I love that story. It's one of his really slight stories, but I love it. And again, it's another one of those that sort of belies the thing that Lovecraft was miserable, because that's really funny.
Absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely.
I'd just like to read before we go on Lovecraft's response to this after he was presented with a copy on the 27th with the dedication to him, because this is a lovely little letter here. I can't say how flattered I feel by the dedication of the Epiphany of Death. That is the most haunting and fascinating thing I've read anywhere in eons, and the style is full of a grave, stately music which makes me think of Poe as he first impressed me long decades ago. I've always dreamed of the rare delight of finding something new by Poe, something I've never read, but which will furnish the same pristine thrill that Poe furnished back in 1897 and 1898. The Epiphany of Death comes closest to realizing that ideal of anything so far, and to have it inscribed to me heightens the pleasure of the perusal. If a reading of Randolph Carter bore such fruit, I shall feel at least the existence of that tale is justified.
Nice.
It's lovely, isn't it? You know,
but that highlights that nice thing again of how they inspire each other, doesn't it? And how you know, this almost like a communal effort sort of thing.
Like Smith here was inspired by Statement Randolph Carter, but you had the same thing with Lovecraft being inspired by sarcophagi.
Yeah.
And things like this.
And the hint back to Poe as well, because this is, you know, it is quite a Poe-esque story in some way. Yeah.
It is very Poe, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
I say another thing I took from this was I recently appeared on the Appendix N podcast, which, if you haven't heard it, looks back at all the literature that influenced Dungeons and Dragons and Gary Gygax. I was recently on it as part of a panel. We were chatting about the Robert E. Howard novel, Hour of the Dragon, the Conan story. And this is exactly the type of story that I think was foundational in setting Dungeons and Dragons up, going down, exploring crypts, strange things happening. And I did find in my research, someone's actually done a D&D kind of version of this called the Catacombs of Ptolemyades. I don't think it's not an official release. I think it's something that someone just did. And I'll put the links up to just posted it up online or some of it.
Right.
And I think it's based on an old TSR campaign called Ruins of Undermountain, which I think was a Forgotten Realms campaign. I never actually played that one. That was 1991. It was a little bit after my time. But as far as I can see, this chap has taken that and adapted it to the Clark Ashton Smith universe. So I'll put a link up. I'll see if I can get a copy. I will, just see out of interest how he's handled it.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah.
Because you get that sense that, you know, holding the torches up and going through winding catacombs and skeletons and all that kind of stuff.
Have to do a sand roll at the end with the worms.
Yeah, it's that sort of juicy detail that a DM or a good keeper likes to put in, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The corpse is talking. No, it's worms.
Yes.
So that's pretty much it, I think. It's, like I say, a short story, but as always, atmospheric, dripping with atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Oozing, that's a better word.
Oozing.
The only other thing I was going to say about this was this Theolus. We see this name or Theo aspect of the name a few times in Smith. I think we've had Theophilus before.
Yes, we did.
And we were sort of saying then, obviously it sounds Greek, but was there any relevance to this? Now, one thing I did find, funnily enough, it was in this month's issue of Fortean Times. I was reading that they've got a big article in there about the German film Hexen, The Witches.
Oh yeah,
which was made in the 1920s, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
I think it's the 20s. And just out of the blue, one of those little sort of weird coinky-dinkies, they had a mention in there of someone called Theophilus of Adana, who was a 6th century priest who reportedly made a pact with Satan to get promotion to Archbishop.
That's awesome. I was because the way my brain is wired, the first thing I think of was the old Lenny Henry character, Theophilus P. Wildebeest. Oh, idiots.
I was thinking that's the only other time I've heard that name, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we don't know if Smith was aware of that particular story or connection, but it's always interesting when these names throw up these, what would you call sort of supernatural occurrences or paranormal events or strange religious stories. So who knows? Maybe that was the Theophilus he had in mind when he chose that name.
It'd be hilarious if it was Pete Wildebeest, though, wouldn't it? It'd be velvet-lined sarcophagi with, lava lamps.
So moving on to our second story today, A Murder in the Fourth Dimension. And what sort of publication history do we have for this one?
Yeah, there's not a hell of a lot about this story. I mean, it's really strange because so far this is the only story that hasn't turned up in any of the letters between Smith and Derleth.
Right.
It's like he didn't send it to Derleth for whatever reason. But it was completed on January the 30th, 1930. So 5 days after he completed the Epiphany of Death.
Okay.
And he sent it off pretty much immediately, and it was rejected by Farnsworth Wright. But yeah,
it's depressing regularity.
I know we don't even need to say that at this point. It's really, really quite depressing. But it was after that it was snapped up immediately by Amazing Detective Stories. They had like a science fiction editor for Amazing Detective Stories, and he was like, "Oh yeah, gimme." And it was published in the October edition of 1930. And that is pretty much it.
Yeah, that was fairly quick publication then, if it was the same year.
Yeah.
There's not a lot about it in the letters between Smith and Lovecraft. We get this on February the 17th, 1930, so pretty much just after he finished it. Dear HPL, I enclose a new story, A Murder in the Fourth Dimension. Maybe you will like the ending. It is really quite fiendish. The Andromeda novelette is progressing slowly, and then he's on. So that's just a very brief mention there. And we get a reply at February the 27th, 1930. Dear Clark Ashton, your new tales are delightful. I can still see that barren and geometrically twisted plane of eternal recurrence in The Murder in the Fourth Dimension. And that's it, really. There's no other reference to it.
The only other thing I really turned up was it was a quote in the Black Book of Clark Ashton Smith. It was a quote from Smith, basically saying that he wasn't a fan of it or of detective stories.
Right.
The true lover of mysteries is not likely to feel any lasting interest in detective stories. Not the least proof of Poe's genius is that he abandoned this genre of writing as soon as he had mastered it.
Well, and I think it's not really a detective story as such, is it? Because it's from the point of view of the murderer.
No.
I mean, sometimes in a detective story, you can know who the killer is.
Yeah.
But the enjoyment is seeing the detective work it out. In this, we know the killer is. There's no detective.
Yeah.
It doesn't have really any of the elements of that genre at all.
Yeah. Ramsey Campbell mentions in the introduction here that Smith was unhappy with Murder in the Fourth Dimension. Perhaps the trouble was that after trapping his narrator in a landscape out of Poe, who is directly recalled in the early pages, Smith can find little for him or the authorial imagination to do.
Yeah.
Though that is part of the point of the tale.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, personally. I thought it was really good.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I think for its time, it's quite we'll talk about fourth dimension or fourth dimensional fiction in a little bit.
Yes.
But it's a nice twist. This is pure Twilight Zone, isn't it? I mean, this is 40 years ahead, isn't it, of that kind of thing?
It really is, isn't it? Outer Limits. Yeah. Yeah, I got that. I'm surprised that this hasn't been done by one of those anthology series. I am really shocked because of most of Smith's work. This is probably the one that would lend itself to that format.
Yeah, lengthwise and everything, it fits.
Yeah, It was perfect, yeah.
So yeah, this is set in the modern day, and it's not fantastic in terms of crypts or strange otherworldly things.
Yeah.
Well, until we get to this idea of the fourth dimension, that's our sort of twist. So, did you get any words from this one?
The only one I got from this is one I was familiar with, but I love it, is viscidity.
Nice.
Which is a glutinous or sticky consistency. Consistency, even. Constituency.
There's a few glutinous constituencies around, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Certainly a few sticky MPs, but we probably best not go into that.
Slimy.
Order.
Order. That's Ghost, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes, Ghost, yeah. I had two choices for this. One, I should have been familiar with this, given that I used to work at a Crown Court, and that's corpus delecti or corpus delecti.
Yeah.
Which is basically the facts or proof of a crime. So if you've got a body in a murder, that shows there's been a murder. That's the corpus delecti.
I actually played them in last week's radio show.
Oh,
yeah, corpus delecti. They're a French goth band. Yeah, I actually played them last week's show.
Nice, excellent name. Excellent name. Now, the other word might excite some controversy, and I'm going to laugh, though it's not really a laughing matter, and I know you're going to laugh, because the word is nonce. There you go. There you go.
Oh, God.
Now, well, first of all, let's get into what he means by nonce in this. This is from Middle English or Medieval English, and it means on this occasion, or in this instance, for the nonce.
You're a nonce.
Yeah. And it, I think the original word, and I'm going to murder the pronunciation, was something like pananes. Again, I don't know how that was pronounced, but pananes, that came into nonce. It's actually, I mean, Shakespeare uses it in Hamlet.
Yeah.
I'll have prepared him a chalice for the nonce.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, at some point in modern times, maybe during the 1970s, this became English slang, particularly now for a paedophile.
Well, it means non-person. It's a prison slang. It started off in prisons, meaning non-person. So sex offenders.
Right.
Yeah, they were the nonces in the sex offender ring. Non-people.
Ah, right.
That you know, because there's a pecking order and a hierarchy in prison, and that's where it comes from. In that sense, it was prison slang, meaning non-person. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Yeah. And the reason I'm laughing is we're putting an anthology together, a new Sword and Sorcery anthology for Innsmouth Gold. And one of the contributing authors, American chap, his story is about competing necromancers who live in various castles and places. And he'd name one of these places Castle Nonce. In his mind, he obviously had this medieval sense of the word.
Yeah.
Castle, medieval, Old English word, that fits. And I had to gently point out to him that if I put a book out about people living in Castle Nonce, that's the reaction we're going to get, right? So,
yeah. I remember years and years ago, went to see a band, American goth band, Christian Death, and they come on stage and announce one of their songs, Days of Yore and Nonce, and everybody started sniggering in the crowd. And you could just see them looking at each other going, why is everybody giggling?
I suppose it's a bit like American Fanny and British Fanny, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, exactly. The fanny pack and big blood. Yeah.
Okay, so those are our words. Oh, there was one other word as well I liked, which was indurate. Indurate.
Oh, I missed that
indurate.
One. Indurate, yeah.
Which basically means to harden. So that was a nice one as well. And the setup for this, we're back in Auburn. We're on home turf for Clark Ashton Smith. And the opening paragraph tells us that the following pages are from a notebook that was discovered lying at the foot of an oak tree beside the highway between Bowman and Auburn. So Bowman is a small town just about a mile or so north of Auburn. And the pages would have been dismissed immediately as the work of a disordered mind, had it not been for the unaccountable disappearance 8 days before of James Buckingham and Edgar Halpin. And experts testify that the handwriting is undoubtedly that of Buckingham. And to give further proof, a silver dollar and a handkerchief marked with Buckingham's initials were also found not far from the notebook. Now, Halpin prick something up in my memory, and you jogged it because you got it.
Yes, yeah. Halpin Frayser, The Death of Halpin Frayser. It's a story by Ambrose Bierce. And the first thing I thought when I saw the name was, I wonder if that was a nod, because in that story, Halpin Frayser is mysteriously bumped off on the road between places. He's found by a tree, and he's been murdered by strange supernatural means. I just wondered if it was, again, because we know Smith was an admirer and knew him, didn't he? So I wondered if it was an odd.
Well, I'm sure it is, as I said before, even with that name before, the Theo names, that Smith was very precise in his use of words. It's hard to believe that he didn't, or it's hard to believe that he wasn't doing this on purpose in some way. You know?
Yeah.
So this is a pretty straightforward plot. We've got Buckingham and Halpin, and there's a woman involved called Alice. They've been friends through their school days, and they both work for the same law firm. And of course, Buckingham is in love with Alice, but Halpin marries her. And Alice, 5 years into the marriage, passes away. And Buckingham hates Halpin, although he never shows it. This is like the sort of Telltale Heart kind of setup, I thought, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And again, yeah, he does name check Poe, doesn't he? You just get that seething, just get pages of seething resentment, don't you? And the way Smith's written it, you get the real sense that there is some real deep hatred here. It's not just like a strong dislike. It's
I know, and it's a strange thing, because it's a sort of hatred that he maintains this relationship with the guy. It's not like those people who got married, I'm never going to see him again, I'm going to move away to another place. He's still part of their life.
Yeah.
And Alice kind of guesses what is going on, but even she knows nothing of his true resentment. And Halpin sees him as a sort of best buddy.
Yeah.
And you get this nice line, I helped him when my heart was a cauldron of seething poisons. I spoke words of brotherly affection and clapped him on the back when I would rather have driven a dagger through him.
Yeah. I knew all the tortures and all the nausea of a hypocrite. And day after day, year after year, I made my varying plans for an ultimate revenge.
This is madness, right? This is insanity.
It's cold, isn't it? This is full on serial killer stuff here.
Because this isn't over a period of months. We're talking 10 years. For 10 years, over the course of 10 years, he starts to study methods of murder. He reads true crime cases. He studies weapons and poisons. Yep. And through his head, he's running in these various plans, that he can use to do away with Halpin.
Yeah.
I imagine the deed is being done at all hours of the day and night in a multitude of places. The only flaw in these dreams was my inability to think of any spot that would assure perfect safety from subsequent detection.
Yeah.
So this isn't, you can say it's a crime of passion because it's over the lost love, but this isn't, there's like an ember of passion there. But it's not like he's going to stab him in a fit of jealousy or rage, is it?
No. This is calculated. This is, yeah. It was my bent towards scientific speculation and experiment that finally gave me the clue I sought. So he's been trying to figure something out. It's almost like that story of American serial killer Ted Bundy, who, when he wasn't going around murdering co-eds, worked in a crisis center, counseling people who had been sexually assaulted. And he did the whole Samaritan thing, talking people down off the ledge and all that.
My word, I never knew that.
Yeah. He worked at the time. He worked with Anne Rule, who later became the true crime writer Anne Rule, who they worked together. And every night after work, he used to walk her to a car, just in case somebody might get her.
Oh, was he the one? Was he stuffing people in the trunk of the car? Was that his MO?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, he did move people about quite a bit, yeah. But he's the one who did the Chi Omega murders when he was on the run. He'd been caught for a series of murders, then escaped, and then went down to Florida and basically snuck into a sorority house and killed 3 people in one night.
So that's I think you're right. This is like a sort of Dexter character, isn't it?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah, exactly.
Outwardly totally respectable. Is leading a perfectly normal life, getting on with everyone, but there's these dark machinations going on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think Bundy was the inspiration behind Dexter, apart from the whole killing killers thing.
Yeah,
because Bundy was a law student.
Oh, right.
And he was a member of the Republican Party, and he was being billed as like the next big thing.
Wow.
And he ended up conducting his own defense. And at the end of his trial, when he'd been given the death sentence, the judge actually said, "Such a shame. You'd have been absolutely great at this, but you chose the wrong path, pal. Take care of yourself." It's terrifying, isn't it? How you could have that duality.
It is, and I suppose you get into that. I mean, it's almost a trope now, isn't it? The intellectual serial killer, the Hannibal Lecter type, who's extremely intelligent and very refined and cultured. It's the other end from the slasher, isn't it?
It is.
You've got the guy in the hockey mask who just goes around. Anyone gets near him is just going to slash them up.
Well, Quantico, Virginia, the FBI thing, the unit that deals with violent crime and serial murders, they put them into two categories: organized and disorganized. And your disorganized serial killer is your slasher type. Right. It'd be somebody like Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. It'd be somebody like that, opportunistic. Whereas your organized is your Ted Bundys. Yeah. Even to a degree, your Jeffrey Dahmers, people like that,
Yeah. Don't look in the fridge.
Yeah. Billy Connolly joke that he got in trouble with on he was on one of these GMTV shows or something like that, and somebody brought up Dahmer and he goes, "Oh, Jeffrey, the only person in history who's on first name terms with half the things in his fridge."
Oh dear, distasteful but true. Now, the thing I like with this story as well is this guy is so involved in this process of trying to come up with the foolproof murder. And this is like the sort of Columbo thing as well, isn't it? What's the foolproof murder? And you're thinking of things like ice daggers, and that kind of stuff. It's those old, there's a dead body in a locked room, blah, blah, blah. It's those kind of things, isn't it? But no, this guy comes up with an interdimensional transporter, basically. Just kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, I'll make a portal. There we go.
He's a lawyer. It's not like he's a scientist even, is it?
No, but but I love it because, I mean, as a way of body disposal, sticking him in a different reality it is pretty foolproof, isn't it?
Well, and I mean it is until we find at the end that it isn't quite,
But it isn't. Yeah,
it's a bit too good, a bit too foolproof. So, and I like the way that Smith is not going to explain any of the science. He's not going to burden us with complicated maths. There are reasons why I do not care to set forth in this narrative the details of the various experiments to which I was drawn during the next 3 years. The theory that underlay my tests and researches was very simple, but the process were highly intricate. And he's talking about the vibratory rate of objects in the fourth dimension could be artificially established by means of some mechanism. Basically is changing the vibrational rate of matter, and that transfers it into this other dimension. That's all you need to know about the science. So whether that's even a thing, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because I read about things like this, and my story that I had in the Tales of Yog-Sothoth, Through the Gates of Yog-Sothoth, Rise and Reverberate, was all about that. It's about resonance and molecule resonance. And I was using music and things like that. I've done it a few times in various different ways, and it is a theory that's been used a lot. One of the parts of that was based on somebody I knew who was a scientist, and he went down the rabbit hole of too many drugs and tried to get his body to resonate at the same frequency as a plate glass window and walk through it. And cut himself up to,
nice.
but yeah, so that is a thing,
Yeah, and eventually he comes up with it's a kind of battery device with a vibratory disc suspended above an ordinary office chair. It's like we were talking about before, where that sort of almost Edwardian steampunk science, isn't it? Where all the cables and everything's on the outside. You can almost picture this
brass
and a leather chair. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of brass valves and all the rest of it. Yeah. Yeah. Something like From Beyond. Well, I guess it's a similar concept to From Beyond, because that's all resonators and resonance, isn't it?
Yeah. And he talks about ultraviolet here as well.
Yes.
It was a big part of From Beyond.
Yeah.
And he starts experiment, and then he puts various articles onto this: a dinner plate, a bust of Dante, a Bible, a French novel, and a house cat. No, not the cat.
And a cat.
But it's good news because they'll come back.
Yeah.
He does get them all back. And I'm not quite sure how he knows it, but he puts these things through the machine. They disappear. And I knew that henceforth they were functioning as atomic entities in a world where all things had the same vibratory rate that had been artificially induced by means of my mechanism. I mean, he's not actually been there himself at this point. So these things could be anywhere, but, we go with it.
But the thing is, I mean, the way it's been written on from his narration, you get the impression that he's unhinged anyway. So
that's a good point.
I mean, to me, that works.
Yeah, so he could be the unreliable narrator.
Exactly. I guess he is the unreliable narrator, but to himself.
Yeah.
Because he sort of convinces himself that what he's saying is right and good and proper, and it turns out it ain't.
Yeah. So in order to do this in great secrecy, which he needs to, of course, he's built a small laboratory in the woods of an uncultivated ranch that he owned, lying midway between Auburn and Bowman. So you can't help feeling, Smith and his shack, this kind of thing, living out of town.
Yeah. But nothing good ever comes out of a laboratory in the woods. It's like David Hambling wrote a story. I can't remember the name of it. The Monsters in the Park, I think it was.
Yeah.
But again, that's got a laboratory out in the woods, and this guy's been sent there to look at something for some gangster. He's just like,
Yeah, never get into an argument with a man who owns a pig farm or who has a laboratory in the woods. So having got this set up, all he's got to do now is get Halpin there and get him in the chair. So an opportunity presents itself because Halpin is suffering from recurrent attacks of terrific neuralgia.
Yeah.
So this guy's in a lot of discomfort, and I guess at this point he'll take any help he can get. And so he gets him to the laboratory and says, well, look, if you sit in this chair and take a seat, Ed, I enjoined him, we'll soon cure everything that ails you.
I hear Vincent Price saying that.
Vincent Price would be a good fit for this.
He would be brilliant, wouldn't he? Yeah.
Now, there's one thing here that confused me. I don't know what you think of this.
Mm-hmm.
He's got Halpin in the chair, and this guy's name is James Buckingham, right? And we've got Edgar Halpin in the chair.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, sure you aren't going to electrocute me? Ha, 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 ha. And he says, oh, no, as he caresses the hilt of the hunting knife in his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And then he asks Halpin, all set? And Halpin replies, sure, Mike, go ahead and shoot. So where does Mike come from?
Oh, yeah.
So did Smith just get the name wrong here, do you think? Because I sort of thought, have I missed something? Is his Igor called Mike? Is it Nick Igor? It's got with him or something.
That's interesting.
Mike and James, that's not like Jimmy or Jim or Jay or something, is it?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, it could just be a cock-up, yeah.
And I mean, I've done this. You must have done this as well.
Oh, I've done it. You changed the name and then you missed one. Yeah. I've done it. Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah. So, I think we can put it down to that.
I'd like to think that it wasn't a mistake, though. Now you've pointed it out. And that this guy's been going under Mike all these years.
Oh, that's a good point.
And that would be awesome. I mean, but it's nice to think along that, that his madness has gone so far that he's been basically doing the talented Mr. Ripley thing,
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. They will know him as Mike. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That lends another little layer to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably total cobblers, but it's more interesting than a simple typo, isn't it?
So he's got Ed in the chair. He throws the switch. The lights dim and flash. There's vibratory rays. There's a puff of thinning smoke, or he melts like a puff of thinning smoke. I could still see his outlines for a moment and the look of a phantasmal astonishment on his face, and then he was gone, utterly gone. Job done. But
Yeah. Now, you see, I had a thought here. Because, again, this guy, he's been plotting and scheming and all the rest of it. He's obviously overlooked the most simple solution. Why didn't he kill him and then just zap the body into the fourth dimension?
yes, because we know that matter can transfer, right? Because it is sent through a book and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and a bust and all the rest of it. So why not just kill him and zap the body?
Because he says here, doesn't it? But it's got rid of him, but this doesn't satisfy his urge for revenge.
Mm-hmm.
But he says the wrong I had suffered was hot and cankerous within me. I could not bear to think that he still lived in any form or upon any plane. So you might think he was transferring him here as like a punishment. You're going to spend the rest of your life in limbo or your existence, whatever. That's the revenge. But no, he wants him dead.
Yeah.
To the extent that now he's going to follow him through and kill him there. Yeah. It seems like a bit of oversight, doesn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
Given that
But again, it's that monomania, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if he's like he's got so wrapped up in this plan that he's overlooked the simplest solution.
Yeah.
Of just when he would clobber him over the head when he's coming in.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Well, save yourself.
No muss, no fuss, zap away the body.
Save yourself 10 years, clobber him over the head, throw him in down a ravine. You know.
But I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? When you're on about this sort of level of it's monomania, isn't it? He's been obsessing over this so long that he is sort of he's he's just blinkered to anything but his own scheme, which I think is actually quite realistic in a way, because you notice that these people who fixate on a problem and their solution doesn't work. Somebody else comes along 2 days later and goes, "Why don't you just do it like that?"
Yeah, yeah. It's so wrapped up in a problem that you overlook the obvious.
Exactly. Yeah.
So nothing but absolute death would suffice to assuage my resentment, and the death must be inflicted by my own hand. So he's going to follow Halpin into that realm which no man had ever visited before. He has no idea what's going to be there, but he's sure he can get back because the cat came back.
Yeah,
which was the name of an old song, wasn't it? The cat came back.
Yes.
Yeah. So great.
He's made himself a portable resonator, hasn't he? To get back.
This was what made me laugh because I had written down portable vibrator, but
well, that's what he calls it. He does actually call it that, because I giggled like a schoolboy earlier.
Oh, Smith was way ahead of his time, and I think he would have approved of such a device as well.
Yeah,
knowing his predilections.
Yes.
So yes, he's got his portable infrared vibrator. That means he can get back, and off he goes. And we get this is again another description from Smith of this travel. Again, we see it in a few stories. We saw it in The Monster of the Prophecy most recently, and we're going to see it again in the future, of this travel between planets, between dimensions, even in time with Ubosatla. And this one is like a descent, a falling.
Yeah, I wondered if the mention of the bust of Dante was intentional, because you get that sort of descent into the inferno kind of thought, sort of feeling, don't you, with this description of
well, he almost references that, doesn't he, because he says it's the black vortex of roaring space and force that seemed to draw me Nadiaward through the ultimate pits. So it's very much that imagery. And then the speed of his fall slows down and he floats gently down to solid ground. And he sees Halpin standing a few feet away.
You also get that impression that it's almost like it's that I've killed somebody, I'm going to hell. Yeah.
And then we get this description of what this fourth dimension looks like. We'll talk about dimensions in a bit, perhaps, but he doesn't go too overboard on this one. When it came to Antares, we had those very vivid and quite full descriptions of the buildings and the vegetation and obviously the alien creatures.
Yeah.
We're pretty much restricted to I would have said that the fourth dimension would be something more colorous and complex and varied, a land of multifold hues and many-angled forms. However, in its drear and primitive desolation, the place was truly ideal for the commission of the acts that I intended. So you do get this sense of being in a sort of grey limbo, really.
Yeah. But it's interesting because obviously this turns out it's more like a pocket universe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is quite a modern thing now, that like these pocket universes, because it's not the vast thing you'd expected, is it? It's, as we'll find out in a minute.
Yeah, but we're not on like an alien world, or there's not there's not four suns in the sky, or
no
vast forests or anything. It just sounds like that. What was the quote? It was the Robert E. Howard quote. The Sumerian afterlife was just wandering around in grey mist forever.
Yeah, which sounds about as much fun as syphilis. Yeah. And here we get it. Here we get it. I laid the portable vibrator aside on the ground as I spoke.
He's got a portable vibrator in one hand and a hunting knife in the other. There's an image.
No, there's an image. Oh, mate.
Perhaps that's why they never did this one on Twilight Zone.
Oh, could you imagine? Oh, God.
So he stabs him. One thrust. And again, that's odd because normally with your crimes of passion or with that rage, it's going to be 20 stab, kind of your psycho thing.
Frenzy, yeah.
But all that stifled hatred, all the cankering resentment of 10 insufferable years was finally vindicated. One stab and Halpin falls in a twisted heap, twitched a little and lay still. And one thing he notices is that the blood oozes very slowly from the wound. The oozing seemed to go on through hours and days.
Yeah.
Now you get this sort of mindset he enters. Is this because of the place, or is this because of the act he's just carried out? I suppose that's the question there. And he even recognized this as himself, didn't he? I was obsessed by a feeling of utter unreality. No doubt the long strain I had been under, the daily stress of endurant emotions and decade-deferred hopes had left me unable to realise the final consummation of my desire when it came. So even though he's killed him, he's still not really satisfied, is he?
But again, you think that's a common thing, isn't it? You see in these kind of stories, and it's that whole thing of like revenge. It's never gonna bring somebody back or fix anything. It ain't gonna help at the end of the day,
Well, we saw it. We covered Worms of the Earth, didn't we?
Yes.
Bram McMahon's story on Innsmouth Book Club.
That's a great example. Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Bran gets his revenge at the end, but he gives the stroke in mercy rather than vengeance, doesn't
he? Yeah.
So, as we always say, Smith takes you to the stars, Mendes and Poyton take you to the gutter. I erected the vibrator in a position where its rays could be turned upon myself and pressed the switch. So, okay, he's done the deed. He's going to go back, except nothing happens.
Nope. Yeah, he gets the same sort of feeling of vertigo and felt that he was about to begin another descent into fathomless vortical gulfs. But though the vertigo persisted, nothing happened. And he was still standing by the corpse in the same dismal milieu. Nice.
And he does what we all do, right? We just press the button again, but press it harder several times. Yeah. Like the remote control or something.
Start slapping it against your thigh. Yeah.
Swearing.
Swearing at it, yeah. And waving it about as if that's going to make it work.
Swearing definitely helps.
Oh, of course it does.
And he thinks, well, is the thing not working? But then he tests it on the silver coin and the handkerchief and that. So that's where we get those things cropping up at the scene of the notebook. And he's sort of comes to the conclusion that the vibrational force, it may be good enough to do a book and a cat, but it's not strong enough to transport a human being back. I suppose the initial transportation was from the full apparatus, wasn't it?
Yes, it wasn't the portable one.
Yeah.
It was his big chair-mounted one. Finally, I gave it up and threw the vibrators on the ground. We've all been there. Sorry.
And in his despair, he feels the need of muscular action. I like that phrase, muscular action. That's good, isn't it? But it's just like, this is like your adrenaline dump, right? You need to move around now to disperse the, well, adrenaline is not strictly the correct term, but, you know. So he starts roaming around this place and he doesn't find much at all, does he, really? Undulating blanks of desolation between the uniform grey of a heaven without moon or sun or stars or clouds. There's no shadows. The soil was a grey dust in places and the grey viscidity of slime in others. And the low mounds I have already mentioned were like the backs of prehistoric monsters heaving from the primal ooze. There's no sign of life, is there? There's no animal, insect, trees, nothing, not even moss or algae.
Yeah, it's literally a void, isn't it? Pretty much. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. And then we get that thing again we had in Satambrazeros, right, where they're running and running from something and they end up back at the same spot.
Yeah.
It's always a nice little moment, that.
Yeah.
So he comes back to Halpin's body.
Yeah, I love this bit here, that the blood still oozed from the fabric of his coat, and the pool it had formed was no larger than when he had begun his journey.
And this feeling of time being different, which is, again, when he looks at his watch, the watch has stopped.
Yep.
So we've got this feeling of being in a totally different time frame or time space as well. And he goes again. Off he goes again, walking around and around, and he just ends up back at the body. So you think he's going to be starting to panic by now.
Yeah.
The corpse is still fresh and the blood has not dried. Apparently, the thing we know as time is well-nigh non-existent in this world. That's basically how it ends. He writes all this out in his notebook as a kind of confession, I suppose, or he feels the need to some obscure need of confessing my crime and telling my predicament to others has led me to an act of which I should never have believed myself capable, for I am the most uncommunicative of men by nature. It seems here he's more shocked and surprised by writing all this down than inventing a machine that can take you to the fourth dimension and killing someone.
Yeah. You do get the impression this is a proper disordered mind we've got here. I mean, you know, the composition of my narrative is something to do. It is a temporary reprieve from the desperate madness that will surge upon me soon, and the grey eternal horror of the limbo to which I have doomed myself beside the undecaying body of my victim. The end. Yeah.
Nice, and that's how it ends. So he's basically just trapped in this place with his victim, and you've got to wonder if time has stopped. Is there such a thing as thirst and hunger, or anything?
Oh no, because he does actually mention that he doesn't feel thirst or hunger. He mentions that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, otherwise he'd probably end up munching down on old Halpin, wouldn't he? But
perhaps he'll do that anyway in his madness. Who knows?
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, he's still got his knife. Well, of course he has. Yeah, he's still got his knife with him. I mean, I would have thought, you know, I was expecting a line saying, "What, you know, what I must do." You know, one of those sort of euphemisms for "I'm going to top myself."
Yeah.
But he doesn't, does he?
No. And that's again, it's nice because it leaves a lot of those questions unanswered. You can kind of fill in your own blanks.
Yes.
You can think, is he still there? Is he gone totally sort of nuts?
He's still there talking to him.
Yeah. Is he going to, you know, would you cut your own wrists or something? Or
yeah. But in that timeless thing, how long would it take you to bleed out?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. It's quite a grim ending, that one.
It is grim. Yeah, it's another one of Smith's grim ones, isn't it? I like it. I really enjoyed it. I've never read it before. I thought it was a really good story. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the same for me. And I think it was this again, you get a lot with Smith. You see a setup, then you think, oh, it's going this way or that way. But he always manages it to twist it in slightly another direction.
Yes.
Although in some ways he does as Lovecraft does. He sets a lot of things up from the start. You know these guys have disappeared. You know he's not coming back.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen. So let's talk about this idea of the fourth dimension, because one thing that I always thought was the fourth dimension is time.
Yes.
Now, that is an idea that has been put forward. That was 1908. A guy called Herman Minkowski presented a paper saying that the fourth dimension is space, time, space, which I think had some or was part of Einstein's work. Now, we're getting into, obviously, mathematics and quantum physics here, neither of which I think we're qualified to comment on with any authority. So
Not
take
at
all this with a
all.
big pinch of salt, and please do let us know if you've got any more information.
Mate, I have to use my fingers and toes to count over 10. You know, I am not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, if you're from Innsmouth, then you can count up to 22. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
The one thing that did stand out for me from this was this idea of the fourth dimension as time-space takes us into non-Euclidean geometry.
Yes,
which I thought was nice. And you can kind of see at this time, obviously, Einstein was just coming through. A lot of these theories were being formed, and Lovecraft certainly latched onto this stuff a lot, didn't he?
Now, something I picked up on was, because I literally read it the other day. I'm reading it's one of the British Library Tales of the Weird anthologies, and it's called Deadly Dimensions. So it's all about like mathematics and all that stuff, and it's got stuff like Hounds of Tindalos in there, and a couple of Blackwood stories and things like that. But the one that I read the other day, that I've never actually read before, was a H.G. Wells story called the Plattner Case. And it's about a maths, I think he's a maths teacher or a science teacher or something like that, who vanishes inexplicably. He's doing some kind of experiment. So yeah, he's a scientist. He's doing some kind of experiment, and there's an explosion, and he talks about resonance and all the rest of it, and this guy disappears. And then a few days later, this other miserable guy, teacher, I think he's the headmaster or something, but he's a bit of a pain in the arse, this chap. He's doing his garden, and this teacher falls out the sky, sort of thing. But it turns out, like, his story is that the resonance and everything has zapped him into a world adjacent to ours, like a pocket.
Right.
But he goes further, and that's all full of non-Euclidean architecture and angles that hurt your eyes and all this stuff that Lovecraft mentions a lot, you know. But also there's these weird forms in it, which brings to mind things like From Beyond, and all that kind of stuff.
Dreams in a witch house, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Geometry is magic kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I saw reading that, and I'd never read that before, and then I read this like this morning. I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I've read two stories of a very similar premise, but it's a good one. Anybody who, you know, if you want to read a Wells you haven't read, that's one to check out. It's a good one.
Nice.
Yeah.
And of course, Wells used very much the same idea of the idea of certainly the fourth dimension is time in the Chronic Argonauts and the Time Machine.
Indeed.
Obviously, his most famous story. But this was a much earlier idea. In fact, the first time this was printed was a guy called D'Alembert, who wrote a book or a paper called Dimensions. That was in 1754. 1880, Charles Howard Hayton wrote an essay, What is the Fourth Dimension? And he was the guy who came up with this idea of the cube within a cube, the tesseract.
Ah, the tesseract, yeah.
So that dates back to sort of Victorian era.
Yeah.
And this was obviously taken up by a lot of authors. There's quite a lot of this throughout literature. I mean, Poe's Eureka in 1848, where he said space and duration are one. So that's space-time continuum, I suppose you'd call it. Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, uses the same idea. And of course, 1884, you had Flatland by... It's another silly thing, always cracks me up. Edward Abbott.
Yeah.
Not Edward Abbott, Edward Abbott. It's like there was an echo when he was christened. And his child, Edward Abbott. And if you haven't read that, I mean, that's one of the kind of almost early example of the weird tale, isn't it? You have a 2D square encountering a 3D sphere. And it's something we've spoken about a lot on the Innsmouth Book Club, is this idea of Lovecraftian entities being beyond our dimension, but we only see the parts that intersect with our dimension.
Yeah,
it's like a straight line experiencing a sphere, but from the perspective of two dimensions.
Well, it's interesting because Charles Stross uses a lot of that in his laundry files, and when he's discussing Shoggoths.
Yeah.
And the part that's the part of the Shoggoth that we see, because we aren't equipped to see the full Shoggoth.
It's a nice idea. I do like that one. Yeah. And Oscar Wilde uses the idea as well in A Canterville Ghost, 1887, where the ghost escapes into the fourth dimension through the wainscoting, I believe. So this idea was certainly about and have been used quite a lot. And I'm sure Smith would have been familiar with most of these authors.
Yeah, well, Blackwood did a couple that were along these lines. One of which was like a detective story. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but so he would definitely, I would imagine, have been aware of that one.
Yes.
And, yeah.
Okay, so that's our second story for the day. Again, I enjoy reading these Smith stories that we've not read before. So next time we're looking at two stories again, two shorter stories: The Devotee of Evil and The Satyr. Again, I've read The Satyr, but not The Devotee of Evil, so looking forward to that.
I think I'm the other way around. I've read The Devotee of Evil and not read The Satyr.
All right. Now, there might be a little break in our episodes because we're coming up to Halloween season, obviously, and we're going to be running a couple of Halloween specials over the next, certainly towards the end of the month. So that might interfere with our schedule a little bit here, but obviously we'll be back to our regular fortnightly schedule as quick as we can. And before we go today, I just want to thank our new patrons who have joined. That's Gary Pennington and Benjamin Slade. Thanks very much for joining. If you'd like to join them and help to support the show, then check out our Patreon site. And of course, when you sign up, not only do you get all the bonus content for Strange Shadows, you get all the bonus content for the Innsmouth Book Club as well, and a monthly copy of Innsmouth News. And speaking of Gary there, Gary actually got in touch with us, and this was the Resurrection of the Rattlesnake episode. And Gary said, I've been listening to Strange Shadows since episode 1. Great work and great to see CAS get some attention. I'm lagging behind. Just listen to episode 6, so slow comment, but as a long-term fan of Blaylock, I feel obliged to observe that he is certainly aware of CAS. Both were California-based authors, and 13 Phantasms is an explicit call-out to Clark Ashton Smith. This is something we mentioned in the show when we're talking about 13 Phantasms. There was a story by Blaylock, or a collection of stories of the same name. So great. Thanks for letting us know that, Gary.
Cheers for that.
Yeah, that's nice that we see that connection there. And we'll put the link up that Gary shared with us as well. We'll put that up in the show notes below. And we've had some more messages in as well.
Yeah, we had one on the Abominations of Yondo. This is another YouTube comment. And somebody says that around 12 or 13 years ago, he got a PDF of video game project based on Smith world building. It included a map of Zothique. The desert of Yondo was placed in some far off border of it. He checked and found that he still has the PDF. So tell you what, mate, send it in. Let's have a look.
Yes, it'd be interesting to see that. I think it was like I presume that game was never made, or we probably would have heard about it, but then it maybe not. Yeah, it was called, Zothique General Guidelines for D20 by G.R. Hager. That's 2002. So, yeah, it would be great to see a copy of that.
Yeah, definitely.
A Zothique map with Yondo beyond the islands of Nut and Erebos in the world's edge.
Awesome.
Nice.
Love the names. You've got to love the names.
They're brilliant, aren't they? And we've also had a few messages in from Just Joe on our YouTube channel as well. So episode 10, he said, I really enjoyed Metamorphoses of the World. I am among the first to admit that it's one of Smith's least impressive stories, but it's still highly creative and highly suspenseful for sci-fi, at least for the time. It feels like a darker and weirder expression of H.G. Wells' alien stories. It's no Satamprazeros or Double Shadow, but even Smith's lesser stories are weird and entertaining. Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely, that's what we've said pretty much all the time, isn't it? On these sort of slight stories, so even the slightest Smith is better than most of the.
It's better than no Smith at all, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that.
And Just Joe also responded to episode 9, The Monster of the Prophecy, and he was telling us there about Smith's dear friend, Dr. W.C. Farmer, who said that Monster of the Prophecy was one of Smith's favourite stories, although Farmer didn't explain why. And he's also given us a link. There's a video up on YouTube which interviews Farmer's younger brother, Noel. Noel describes his childhood memories of Smith. Apparently, Smith spoke deep and lofty topics even to small children, and also describes his older brother, Dr. Farmer's relationship with Smith and his wife. So we're going to put the link up to that. I think it's about a 30 or 40-minute video. The first couple of minutes are in Swedish or Norwegian, we're not sure which, but the rest of the interview is entirely in English. So we're certainly going to be checking that out. And as I say, we'll share the link.
Oh, that's really cool.
So thanks for that, Just Joe. I don't know whether to call you Joe or Just Joe, but...
Or just. Yeah, cheers for that, mate. Much appreciated. Yeah. I'm glad you're enjoying the show.
Excellent. So that's the sort of thing we do like to get coming in. As we always say, Tim and I are fans. We're not scholars, as you might have guessed. Well, you've probably been dazzled by a mastery of quantum physics there today.
Yeah. Well, at least we didn't resort to the Doctor Who as a wibbly wobbly space thingy.
So yeah, keep all those comments coming in. As I said before, you can comment on our YouTube. Oh, thanks also to our new YouTube subscribers as well. We've had 80 new subscribers over the last month, so that's excellent.
Oh, nice.
Do write in and tell us what you think. Any comments, any queries, or any suggestions. Right, I believe that's it for this episode. Hopefully we'll be back soon in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, do keep an eye on our site for our Halloween specials coming up. We're going to be doing a live Halloween chat from Innsmouth with some special guests. So that promises to be a real treat.
Indeed. Yeah. We'll also have my reading of Ambrose Bierce's Some Haunted Houses. I did the whole anthology. It's about an hour, because they're all really quite short stories. But yeah, that'll be up around that time as well.
Excellent. So with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Whiten.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.